Elena, thank you so much for that. Here with me now is a Democratic member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, thank you so much for being here. Iran's supreme leader is now dead. We've seen videos of Iranians celebrating in the streets. Put aside your opposition to how these strikes were carried out. The elimination of the Ayatollah, is that a good thing for America?
Absolutely, Dana. Look, Ayatollah Khamenei was the longest serving and among the most brutal dictators in the world. He had the blood of many Americans on his hands, from the attack on Khobar Towers in Saudi to the attack on the Marine barracks in Beirut to the killing of many American service members in Iraq. The Iranian regime has been the greatest exporter of terror in the region, and I will not grieve for one moment the passing of the supreme leader of Iran. And frankly, the success in taking out many of the leaders of the IRGC. My concern is that Iran has three main weapons. They've got ballistic missiles and drones, and they've launched many at our allies and partners in the region, as well as at our service members and bases. They've got cyber capabilities, and they've got terrorist capabilities around the world. And so today, I am praying for our service members, our diplomats, our civilians in the region, for all of our partners and the civilians in the region, and hope that our national security apparatus is as prepared as it can be for attacks anywhere in the world against the United States and our interests as Iran seeks to strike back for our success in taking out one of the most brutal dictators in the region.
You think that's going to happen in a way that's more robust than what we have seen so far?
Well, I think the Iranian regime has its back to the wall. And I think, unlike the 12-day war last year, where they de-escalated relatively quickly, they see the killing of their national leader and the scope and breadth of the strikes against Iran, and President Trump declaring a full-scale war to achieve regime change as the moment, I believe, where they need to throw everything they've got against us. That's why they're attacking civilian targets in countries in the region. Dana, I spent yesterday afternoon calling the ambassadors to the U.S. from Jordan, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, just to express support and to thank them for standing by us. They're receiving attacks from drones and missiles, and in some cases, they're hitting civilian infrastructure, like the Fairmont Hotel in Dubai. And this is causing real alarm by our allies in the region. They need to know that we have their back.
In the wake of the initial strikes on Iran, you said this is not how a democracy goes to war. And I want to ask you about that, because you well know that senators in both parties have been all too willing over the past, 2+ decades, even more, to give Democratic and Republican presidents a lot of leeway in using military action overseas how they see fit without Congress weighing in.
That's right. And one of our challenges is getting correct the balance between scope and means for a war. In this case, President Trump has launched a war of very large goals: regime change, ending a nuclear enrichment program, eliminating all of their ballistic missiles, but with limited means. As far as we've heard so far, only attacks by the air, by missiles and by airstrikes. There's no example I know of in modern history where regime change has happened solely through airstrikes. And I hope and pray we won't see American boots on the ground in Iran. Iran is dramatically different than either Iraq or Venezuela. It is 4 times larger than Iraq, has double the population, has a regime that's been in place nearly 50 years, and that is incredibly repressive domestically. It lacks some of the internal divisions and the mobilized opposition that existed both in Venezuela and in Iraq. In Venezuela, many of the military and intelligence services actually speak English and trained with the United States before Chavez came into power. So we were able to actually remove the leader and have almost immediate negotiations with potentially partners and compliant members of the Venezuelan leadership. That's not going to happen in Iran. This is going to be much tougher, and the consequences are much more unpredictable. And last, I'll just remind you, President Trump ran on no new foreign wars of regime change. So I hope the folks who voted for President Trump expecting that are looking harder at this moment and at what Congress should be doing to rein in the scope of this war and this military adventure.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you noted at the beginning of that answer that you don't remember any example of successful regime change with military action solely from the sky and not ground troops. Are you suggesting that maybe there could be ground troops as long as Congress authorizes it? Or are you saying that perhaps regime change isn't realistic when it comes to the goals?
I think regime change is a very ambitious goal here. I wish that were not true. I would like to see a successful uprising. And obviously, the murder of thousands of innocent Iranians who were protesting the regime is just one of the most recent of the horrible actions of the Iranian regime. But the most recent example we could both point to is the air campaign against Gaddafi that produced chaos in Libya for years. There is one hopeful recent example in Syria where a seemingly stable repressive regime was overthrown relatively quickly, but that was by an armed, organized opposition. In Iran, it's not at all clear to me how regime change will happen. My fear is that by opening this new chapter, by choosing the path of war when diplomacy was still within reach, that what Trump will cause is a more repressive, more aggressive Iranian regime, that the IRGC will massacre more of its civilians, and that they will be more aggressive in the region. I hope that is not the case, but that is the concern that animates my expression of opposition to this war at this time with this scale and scope.
Well, you say that diplomacy was happening and some kind of deal was within reach, but you well know that a lot of the president's allies were pushing him to go ahead with these strikes because it wasn't just the nuclear program, that this is a moment of strategic weakness for Iran, economically, militarily, and also because of the protests. Even though the tens of thousands were killed, there is more unrest, civilian unrest, at least publicly, than we have seen in a very long time. So given that, I know you don't support the notion of doing this, how the president did it, but do you understand why?
Yes, I can understand the president taking a bold gamble, but I disagree with this gamble at this moment, because I do think, according to the Omani foreign minister, that the Iranian regime, the weakest it's been in years, was actually making real concessions. And I did support the JCPOA, the agreement negotiated under Obama that got inspectors into every aspect of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. I think it was possible to achieve, through diplomacy and intense pressure aligned with our allies, to get Iran to finally stop its support for terrorism in the region, to rein in its ballistic missile program, and to stop its nuclear enrichment program. I at least think that should have been given more of a chance before we launched a broad spectrum war. As it is, I understand, given how weak this very dangerous and terrorist regime is at the moment, that President Trump decided to take the path of war. But in a democracy, a war of this scale should not happen without congressional approval.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much for being here this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, as the Mideast faces